Thanks, David. Thanks. Can you hear me up the back? Good. Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, croupier, esteemed members and fellow guests, this is my 5th year as a guest. 4 of those as a guest of the iconic Robert Barr, who I felt at the time must have been grooming me for something. So this must be it. It's an honour for me to have been asked to respond on behalf of the guests tonight, as it's not lost on me how special this club is. The longest consecutively running Burns club in the world is a big deal, and I'm sure none of my fellow guests underestimate that. But like Robert Spencer, who replied on behalf of the guests in 2020, I'm a Glaswegian chap. You might have been able to pick that up from my accent. Well, I was a Glaswegian. This is my 17th year of residency in this lovely wee town. So Lindsay's historical insight earlier on was pure gold to me. I remember my first ever sojourn to Dalry was back in 1978 when I was a young greenhorn telephone engineer. In North Ayrshire had too much work and not enough engineers, and 6 of us were sent down from Glasgow to help out. I remember one of my first jobs I got was in Dalry, and one of the big grand houses on the left as you go up West Kilbride Road. I can't remember which one. But the noise of my van wheels crunching on the gravel announced my arrival, and I could see the curtains twitch in one of the front rooms. So I walked up to the door and I rang the bell. It's one of those real brass bells, when you pulled the lever. It was none of your battery-powered crap for the elite of Dalry, you know. Anyway, after a short time, the door opened and there was a wee 12-year-old boy standing there. And he was dressed in his father's smoker's jacket and cravat and carpet slippers. And he was holding a big glass of brandy and a cigar in his left hand, and he had his right arm round a prostitute. And I said, telephone engineer, son, is your mum or dad in? The wee boy looked at me and says, it can look like it. Anyway, so inspired by that event, it came to pass that 28 years later, in 2006, there I was sitting in a furniture van, having uprooted myself from Glasgow to set up home in this lovely wee town. But I have to say, the people have welcomed me with open arms for the last 16 years. So the move was inspired by my wife, who wanted to be nearer her mother in Ardrossan, who wasn't getting on with the neighbours. And I can remember in the early days going over to see her, driving over to see her, and as we arrived in the street, I could see she was in the front garden with 5 guys punching lumps out of her. So I pulled up the car and I parked in it. I put on the brake and turned off the engine. And my wife said, are you not going to go out and help? I said, no, 5 guys will be enough, surely. So in the early days, I was a bit wary that I was going to be identified as an interloper in Dalry, and I shared my concerns with my pal Alan McGinley, that the cameras in the main street seemed to be following me every time I came out the co-op. And he says, you're talking nonsense. How can people identify as an interloper? I said, well, I'm the only guy in the town with 2 eyebrows. Everybody else in here's got the same mother. And that's another thing about the people of Dalry. They never take offence, I hope. So coming to Dalry, I had to learn all the new legends. Bessie Dunlop, the Lynn Glen Witch, sound a bit more plausible than Rab Haw the Glasgow Glutton. But moving into the Burns country in Ayrshire, to be where the world's best poet used to live, and coming from where the world's worst poet did live. Now, a lot of people think that McGonagall was the world's worst poet, William McGonagall, but those of you who were fans of Parkinson in the 80s will remember that a Glasgow poet went on there, a guy called Walter McCorriskin, who had the pleasure of knowing before he passed away in 2010. And Walter established himself as the world's worst poet. He started off in life as a gravedigger in Renfrewshire, and he used to spend time dreaming up epitaphs for the people he was burying. Epitaphs like Colonel Edwin Sidney, Master of Hounds. Beneath these sods 6 foot down lies Colonel Edwin Sidney. His horse jumped clear of a 6 foot wall, but alas, poor Sidney didn't. or Herbert Smith, glass blower. A friend of many, a friend so true. A pity he sucked when he should have blew. Or the odes to the animals. A horse. A horse came galloping through the woods. An animal in trepidation. It caught its head in a sycamore branch. Suspended animation. Or a flea. Decisions, decisions. Wept the flea as he pondered on a log. If I go to town today, will I walk or take a dog? Or my personal favourite was the coyote. The coyote is a wondrous sight. It laughs all day and half the night. I wonder would it laugh so much if somebody kicked it in the crutch. So, you see, gentlemen, it's a no-brainer for me moving to Ayrshire to immerse myself in the rich culture and the rich prose of Burns. And indeed, you know, to enjoy the rich talent of the Rye Burns Club, which I've thoroughly enjoyed tonight, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of my fellow members. It's been a terrific night, and I look forward to more of the same. I suppose, looking back to my childhood, there was a friend of mine called Billy Chapman, who, when he went to school, the teacher read it out as Chapman Billy. Now, Billy's dad was called Thomas or Tam, and his mother was called Kathleen or Kate. And Tam himself was partial to one or two reaming swats of an evening, and Kate, for her part, did gather her brows like gale and storm and nurse her lad to keep it warm. And the funny thing was, Billy's grandmother, who he called Nanny, did look like a witch. So if he'd had a horse called Meg without a tail, they could have had a Burns-themed nativity play in that family. Anyway, I suppose I was destined to immerse myself in Burns, and here I am tonight, enjoying your company, gentlemen, and enjoying the great acts that have been on earlier on. So I wish you all the best, your good health,